Greetings in the lovely name of Jesus. Welcome to the Prodigal Voice podcast. We're so glad that you've joined us this evening, and we hope that you'll be blessed and encouraged by what you hear as we go through part 3 of Introduction to a Wasted Life. That would be my story, and I am the Prodigal Voice. When we left off last episode, we were in 1989, and I had recently left the car business for good, and at the advice of my new wife, had gone to work for Montgomery Ward in the auto department. And in the auto center, the manager that was there when I was hired left shortly after I came on board, and 3 months into my tenure at Montgomery Ward, I had been promoted to the auto center manager. The auto center was in poor shape financially. It was running a deficit budget, and they expected me to do something about it, and I believe that it was the hand of God at work even then that helped me to bring that situation under control, put some security issues in place, and stop some of the employee theft. And we turned that auto center around in such a way that within 6 or 8 months, we were in the black, where we had been over 6 figures in the red prior to my taking over. And that certainly is nothing to say anything great about me. It's just a matter of putting your head together with some other people, making your employees happy, making sure that they're paid adequately so that they don't feel the need to steal. And when that happened, everything seemed to turn around. And so I was very pleased. But I also mentioned that in the interim, while I was working for Montgomery Ward and had moved up into management, I had received a phone call from John Fagley telling me that he had some evidence he needed me to look at, and he had some things he wanted to show me. And he told me he could either do it one or two ways. He could come with the sirens blaring, and he could just bust up in the house and take me out, or he could pull in the driveway in an unmarked car just like he was one of the other guys in the neighborhood, and we'd get in it, and we'd go off to their little hidey hole that they had, where that the narcotics cops hung out, and we'd take a look at the evidence. And of course, I knew my goose was cooked. I knew I didn't have much of a chance, so I didn't give him any hard time. I just cooperated, and I was a businessman. I was somebody that had some bit of respect from others and about himself. And so we went down, and he pulled out all the evidence, and sure enough, Stan had been setting me up, hanging me out to dry, trying to save his own skin, and I guess I can't fault a fella for that, especially when you got a big dummy like me sitting there waiting for you to take advantage of him. And so that was the way it happened. Of course, I had already quit cocaine by the time I was arrested in November of 89 rather, and had been off and out of the entire scene for about 6 months. And I made it very, very clear. I made it very public to the guys that I had associated with, that had been working together with me and pooling their funds together, that I was not coming back, and that I didn't want to see them on my property. I didn't want to have them around my home. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And they knew I was serious, because I told them, you come up in here and start trying to tempt me to use drugs or use cocaine, I'm going to blow somebody's head off. And I was probably speaking a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but maybe not. I don't know. I never got put in a position, because they sufficiently understood I had to leave it behind, because I had a wife now that was more important to me than getting high. So after having made that so public and declared to everybody what was going on and that I was no longer going to be in the gang, the law enforcement told me that it was pretty understood that everybody that's ever been a cokehead comes back and uses again. And I made it clear to them, I said, fellas, I said, maybe everybody does, but not me. I said, I am not coming back and doing the drugs because I know what a hold it had on me, and I've been clean for 6 months. I'm not interested. And they said, well, what we're going to do, we're just going to keep this out of the papers, and we're going to play it real low key. Nobody will ever know that you got arrested, and we'll give it some time and let it pass another 6 months or so, and then we'll start talking about a plan. And so we let it slide for about 6 months, and then they said, okay, it's time to start talking about a plan. And the situation with my charges was that as a drug kingpin, the charges that I was facing was absolutely no possibility of parole and a 15-year minimum sentence in a federal correctional institution. So, I mean, I was looking at doing some pretty serious time as a first offender. I had never had a record of any kind in my past. Probably deserved one, but I hadn't had one. And 15 years is a pretty good stretch for a first-time offender. So we batted it around a little bit, and what they told me was that if I was going to get the charges moved out of federal court and into the district court in the parish of Rapides, I was going to have to bring down somebody that was a good bit bigger than I was. And it was time for me to start fishing for a big one. And so we discussed it, and the topic came up about how I'm going to go under after I had been out for a year, hadn't touched it, hadn't been around it, and wasn't intending to use. And they said, oh, well, you can't use. And I said, wait a minute. You expect me to go undercover, get back with the guys that I used to use with, and fake them out? Like, I'm not really going to do that. There's no way. And they said, well, you're going to have to be able to pass your urine test. And I said, here's the deal. I said, I will go undercover, and I will do my best to get my connections reestablished, but I'm going to have to use dope. And I said, the agreement is you don't pee test, you don't test my urine, and I will not face the court. I said, I just don't want to do it. I want to stop this right here if we can and get this thing out of federal court because I don't want to go away for 15 years. So we came to an agreement. I would go undercover. They would not test my urine, and I would use as I had to. And, you know, hindsight is always 20/20. And during all of this that was going on, I felt persecuted. I had no ability to see the hand of God working in everything that was going on. But it absolutely was the hand of God that was working, because at the time that I had been a user, I had mentioned it earlier, cocaine was powder, and you took a snort of powder and that was it. Crack was just not common on the street. But by the time that I got back into it, crack had become very, very popular. And so the guys that I had to use with and the guys that I had to get back in the good graces of were all wanting to smoke crack. And it made a totally different character than snorting powder cocaine. They became paranoid, and every car that drove down the street was a cop car, and they were hiding and peeking out the curtains and getting down on the floor and trying to not be able to be seen, and they were behaving in such erratic ways. I mean, and I was smoking right along with them, but God protected me because I never got high. The entire time I was undercover smoking crack on a regular basis, I never got high, and I never had the first inkling of an addiction. Now, I wasn't living for God. I wasn't giving him the time of day, but still, he loved me enough as his child that he protected me. I have kin that at 50 smoked crack one time and was so addicted that by the Monday following smoking taking a couple of hits off of the pipe on a Friday. By Monday, he was climbing the walls. And it ended up costing him so much. Yet, he was able to win the victory over it and get out from under the addiction, but it cost him a price. And so I know that it was the hand of God and a miracle that I did not get addicted to smoking crack and that I did not ever get high. I never felt that buzz that everybody talks about. So I did my thing undercover. I had to face death threats. I had to face some of the guys that I was smoking with, thinking that I was too cool and too laid back, and they said, you got to be a cop. And I just got up in their face and did what you have to do in those situations, and you've got to be more convincing than they were. And I just told them they better hope the gun was made out of chocolate because I was getting ready to feed it to them. And they all busted out laughing and said, oh, no, we just messing with you, man. We just messing with you. So that's the way it goes when you're out there playing with the devil's candy. It's just not a pretty place. It's not a good place. And yet, this was something I had to do to try to get my sentence reduced to where it might be manageable. So I went under, and over a period of time, I reestablished my connections, and I was able to work back through the system. And they had me working very diligently to set a guy up, and he was a local there in Alexandria. He was a lieutenant on the fire department, and he had established houses across I-10 from Albuquerque all the way to Pensacola, and that's where he stashed his quantities of dope. And on his long days off as a fireman, he would then make a run to one end or the other, east or west, and he would pick up his dope and bring it back to Alexandria to dole out to all of his street handlers. And so his name was Lester Davis. He's deceased, or I wouldn't have said his name. But he and I had talked, and I told him that my connection in Houston had some excess cocaine that he needed to get rid of, and he needed to get rid of it very quickly. And he was willing to move it for a bargain basement price. And the price sounded really, really good to Lester. And we came to an agreement, and he agreed to buy it. And so we had a meet set up at the Roadway Inn in Alexandria on the backside. I had the DEA, FBI, New Orleans Narcotics Task Force, Houston Narcotics Task Force, the State Police Narcotics Task Force, and the Rapides Parish Narcotics Task Force in about 5 rooms spread out across the back of that hotel. In the room where I was, there were 5 kilos of untouched, uncut, pure cocaine. Never had been stepped on, and that was what Lester was coming to buy. Well, everybody was set up, everything was good to go, and it was getting about an hour, hour and a half before he was supposed to arrive, and I got a phone call in my room. And of course, they had it all wired and tapped up, and they were listening to what was said, and it was Lester. And he said, hey, man, he said, I just wanted to check in on you, see if you might have had somebody else lined up to take care of your problem for you, because he said, it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to make it. And I asked him why, and he drove a Dodge Viper, which has unidirectional tires, which means that they can only turn one way. You can't move them from left side to right side. And the rear tires are a different size than the front tires. And driving down Interstate 10 near Beaumont, out by the tire factory, he had hit something on the highway and blown out both tires on the right-hand side. And there were not 2 tires that would fit that car within 1,000 miles of Beaumont, Texas. Houston did not have any that would fit. There was nobody had them in stock to be able to replace both right side tires on a Dodge Viper. So he said he's just not going to make it, and the state police were listening in, and they had immediately called Beaumont and had the Beaumont police go out and look, and sure enough, there sat Lester's bright yellow Dodge Viper with 2 flat tires on the right-hand side, and they checked, and there were absolutely no tires available. So God allowed everything to work out the way that it did because those narcotics officers all got their heads together and they agreed that I had done my job. I had done exactly what they had asked me to do, and if it hadn't been for two blown out tires, they would have taken Lester Davis off the streets and solved a big part of the supply issue of what was coming into Alexandria. So I got credit for the bust that was never made. And that moved my case out of federal court where that there were no options for probation, there were no options for getting out of a jail sentence. I was going to jail for 15 years. Moving it into district court put so many more options on the table. And I give God full credit for what he accomplished and what he did there because he protected me from having to go spend that hard time. And so as they gave me credit, the case went to arbitration. It took about 2 years altogether, 2.5. And it was about 1992 whenever everything was finalized, and I was sentenced to 7.5 years, active probation, no jail. The minimum jail sentence that I would have received would have been 5 years, but because they felt that as a first-time offender, they allowed me to get off with just probation for 7.5 years, and then I would be able to get back on with my life and travel and go places. But as it all turned out, the 7.5 years didn't turn into a big deal. The one condition was the DA did say that the only condition he was going to enforce was that they could not sentence me under the expungement rule. He wanted me to carry for the rest of my life the flag of being a convicted felon. So that's exactly what they did. They sentenced me under a law that said that I could not ever have my sentence expunged. So I will be a convicted felon until I die, but I've not yet spent a night in prison for all of the bad behavior that I had. And to make things even more phenomenally unbelievable to the carnal mind, I never applied for a governor's pardon. And as far as I know, no one ever applied for a governor's pardon. My wife was a deputy clerk of court, and she had all the means and the knowledge, and she could have, but she did not. I have no idea why Governor Foster chose me out of all of the convicted felons in the state as he was getting ready to leave office, but he chose me and gave me a full governor's pardon, what they call a gold seal pardon from the governor, which if I had not had the expungement clause in there about not being able to have it expunged, I would have had full 100% rights. As it is, the only right that I sacrificed was my right to bear arms, and I have no problem with that. So God, for somebody that was not even interested in him at that point, stepped in and did things that are unbelievable, and I've never heard of them being done before, giving credit for a bust that never happened, that got me out of a federal penitentiary, that put me in a position to be able to have probation for 7.5 years, that then after 1.5 years of serving probation was obliterated and wiped out by the governor's pardon. That's the kind of God that we serve. He loved me enough that he went that extra mile to take care of me because he sees the end from the beginning. And he knew that there was still something that I needed to do for the kingdom that he intended for me to do. And if I would just be a little bit cooperative, he would help me and get me out of my circumstance. And he sure enough did. And along the way, with all of that was going on, making my appointments with my probation officer for that 1.5 years, I was working for Montgomery Ward, and I never one time had anyone at Montgomery Ward know that I had ever been involved in drugs or that I had ever had a felony conviction. It never hit the papers. So I was able to go through and continue my employment and provide for my family. In fact, I had continued to move up in the company. They loved the job that I had done in Alexandria to turn that auto center around, so they transferred me to a much larger store in Baton Rouge and asked me to do the same kind of magic for that store, which was a little more difficult because of the size and the number of employees. But we managed to get it done in 9 months. And that 9 month period I spent living in Baton Rouge alone. And my family was in Alexandria. I'd get to see them every other weekend. And that was it. That was not a fun time. And it came time for the school year to be over, and it was time for us to make a decision on where we were going to live and the schools and everything. And once we got to investigating the way systems worked in Baton Rouge, my wife told me that if I wanted to stay in Baton Rouge, I was more than welcome, but she wasn't coming. And when she told me she wasn't coming, I told Montgomery Ward I wasn't staying. And because I had done such an outstanding job for them, through God's help and other things, they made a position for me back in Alexandria in the electronics department, where I would be able to get involved with computers, which I had never really fooled with them much other than in elementary school. We'd played around with punching cards and a few other things to be able to draw figures and stuff like that, but not really in the computer field with personal computers and network computers. And so they made me a position there, and I've always had a good knack to be able to sell, and I quickly became the #1 salesman of computers and fell in love with them. I spent all my time learning all that I could, but we had a problem. Personal computers were brand new, and people would take them home and they would mess them up, and they would totally just trash them, and then they would just come back and get a refund. And we were selling a whole lot of computers, but we were taking about 80% of them back and giving them a replacement. So I had figured out how to clone the hard drives on those little rascals, and I put it all on 3.5-inch floppy disks that aren't floppy, and had all of it recorded and all of it ready. And when they would come in with a returned computer, I would have them go up to the coffee shop, and the lady that ran the coffee shop was Miss Ethel. And I said, you go see Miss Ethel and you tell her that your coffee and your Danish are on me. And I'll call and let you know when your computer is ready. And then I would take my 3.5-inch disc and I would restore the computer back to its new condition. And then I would call them, and when they came back, I would tell them I was going to come out to their home and bring the computer to their house, and I was going to set it up for them and give them 30 to 45 minutes instruction on how to use it without totally tearing it up. And that's what I did, and our returns went from 80% down to about 7% because of what we were doing, and I thought I had become a computer whiz. So at that time, I began to look into real computing and business computing, and there was a company in town by the name of Time Trend Computers. And Time Trend Computers was the #1 computer outfit going in Alexandria, Louisiana. So I strolled over and saw that they had an ad in the paper, and I strolled over to their offices and applied for the job. And sure enough, they didn't do background checks. So they didn't know that I was a convicted felon either. They just thought I sounded pretty good and seemed like I had my head on my shoulders, and they hired me. That was in March the 23rd of 1993. And I went to work there as a commission sales rep, and as always, favor seemed to shine on me, and within 3 months I had been moved into a management position because we were adding salespeople at a very fast pace. The business was starting to take off, and they put me on salary right away because they said I was making more money than the CEO of the company in sales, so that was fine. I didn't care. I just loved what I was doing. I enjoyed it tremendously. And we were very, very focused initially on selling compact computers. But I got into a situation and a relationship with IBM where that it made more sense for us to start focusing on the IBM product. Now, in the past, IBM had been very proprietary in everything that they did, and they weren't real standard with all the other computer companies. And that made them a little bit unattractive in that the pricing was higher. They built all their own components, and there was just a lot of things that made it tough. But the relationship that I was able to work out started moving us that direction. And we became a very aggressive IBM business partner, not only in the PCs and the PC server business, but I also had become proficient in working with the AIX systems, which is IBM's Unix system. And I built that business up through the state of Louisiana and some of the larger businesses in Louisiana by selling large systems. And that became pretty much my specialty in the sales world. And it was driving some really, really big numbers. You know, it was systems that were selling in the $1 million to $3 million range at times. And so all of a sudden, what was a $1,500 to $3,000 system times 5, maybe a $70,000 network. We were now selling single systems and networks that were going for $1 million to $3 million. And that scored a lot of points. And as we continued to grow, by 6.5 years into my tenure at Time Trend, we had 190 employees. I had been the 18th employee hired at the company, including office, staff, accounting, everything. There were 18 of us, and in 6.5 years, we had gone from 18 people to 180 or 190 people. We had also built our IBM relationship to the point that we were manufacturing IBM PCs and servers for IBM. And I had been moved into the position as a vice president of business development. And my job was to go around and tell the Time Trend story to IBMers all across the nation. I traveled to White Plains, New York, and Rochester, Minnesota, and Raleigh, North Carolina, to the Triangle Park, and up into Seattle in that area, and then in Colorado, in the Colorado Springs area. And all I did was make presentations and explain to IBM why that we should be one of 5 out of 12,000 business partners that would be authorized to manufacture IBM computers. And we won. We got the contract. We provisioned a warehouse at a closed Air Force base there and had ISO 9000 certifications and everything, a full assembly line just like they had in Raleigh. And it was a very successful time. But in spite of the success, in spite of the things that I had accomplished, in spite of the way my negative event with narcotics had turned out, in spite of how good everything looked, I was still very dissatisfied. I was still looking for something more. And it seemed like that was the cry of my heart continually, nonstop. There's got to be something more. And I think of that song, I think it was Helen Reddy or somebody like that that sang, "Is that all there is? Is that all there is, my friend?" I mean, I was making 6 figures in 1990. And that was pretty good money back then. And more money than I'd ever made, that's for sure. And it would seem like I should have been satisfied, but I was not. I was still searching and seeking to find the answers. And I told you it would probably take 4 episodes, and it looks like it's gonna. Because as I come to a conclusion today, we didn't make it as far as I wanted to, but we got to 1998. And I thought this was really my pot of gold that I'd been looking for. But nothing satisfied, and I was miserably unhappy. And we'll pick up there at beginning of 1999 in our relationship with IBM. And I'll tell the rest of my story beginning tomorrow. God bless you. I pray that each of you is blessed and has a tremendously marvelous day. And God cause His face to smile upon you, and go in Jesus' name.